Hello. In our usual daily news briefing, here are the main global events from yesterday. On October 6th, Greta Thunberg and hundreds of international activists were deported after being illegally detained by Israel at sea. When Thunberg arrived in Athens on Monday, she was greeted with applause from the public. I stated clearly, a genocide is happening here. International systems are betraying the Palestinians and failing to prevent the most horrific war crimes, said the 20-year-old activist. Swedish activists also said that when Thunberg was detained, she was forced to wear an Israeli flag and was denied access to food and medicine. This story is not about us. It's about Israel violating international law, blocking humanitarian aid from entering Gaza, and trying to destroy an entire people, she added. According to her, the purpose of the flotilla was to deliver aid and draw attention to the civilian population at a time when governments are failing to meet their obligations. Swiss and Spanish activists also said that during their detention in Israel, they faced conditions inconsistent with humanitarian standards. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs completely rejected these accusations, stating, "Those detained were provided with water, food, and access to restrooms, and they exercised their right to contact a lawyer," Israeli officials said.
French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu served only 28 days in office before resigning on October 6th. The government he formed on Sunday lasted just 14 hours. Lecornu resigned suddenly and unexpectedly after both his supporters and opponents threatened to bring down his government. In particular, France's far-right National Rally Party called on President Emmanuel Macron to immediately dissolve parliament and hold early elections. Meanwhile, the far-left France Unbowed Party demanded that Macron himself resign. Lecornu's 28-day tenure became the shortest-lived government in modern French history. If there are no conditions to work, it is impossible to remain prime minister, Lecornu said after his resignation. He also urged his colleagues to always put the interests of the nation above party politics. Political instability in France has been intensifying since the 2022 presidential election, as no single party has been able to secure an absolute majority in parliament. The two prime ministers before Lecornu, François Bayrou and Michel Barnier, were both forced to resign due to opposition in parliament over their efforts to reduce government spending.
Representatives of China during trade negotiations with the United States proposed making massive investments in the American economy under certain conditions. A few days later, Chinese President Xi Jinping, in a phone conversation with US President Donald Trump, emphasized the need to create favorable conditions for Chinese companies to invest in the United States. Among these conditions is a request to ease national security restrictions on deals that Chinese companies can carry out in the US. According to Bloomberg sources, earlier this year, Chinese representatives proposed a large-scale investment package estimated at $1 trillion. It is currently unclear what exact amount is being discussed, but Beijing is also demanding lower tariffs on imported goods used by Chinese factories built in the US. For several years, the United States has been trying to limit China's economic development in various areas. Externally, Washington has restricted the sale of high-tech chips, including those used for artificial intelligence, to China. The U.S. representative, however, rejected easing investment restrictions, saying that China regularly deceives the United States in trade agreements.
On October 3rd, delegations from Hamas and Israel began indirect negotiations in Egypt to discuss U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza. The talks involved sharp disputes over the withdrawal of Israeli troops and the disarmament of Hamas. The negotiations were held in the Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh, mediated by Egypt, the United States, and Qatar. According to a Palestinian official cited by Reuters, following the first session that ended on Monday evening, further meetings were scheduled for today. Hamas presented its position on the stages and timeline for the release of hostages and the withdrawal of Israeli forces. The group also requested assurances that Israel would commit to a permanent ceasefire and a complete withdrawal. Meanwhile, even as the talks concluded, explosions and sounds of collapsing buildings were still heard in Gaza City. Local residents reported that Israeli strikes had not fully stopped, though their intensity had decreased. Gaza health officials said that in the past 24 hours, 19 people were killed by Israeli airstrikes. An Israeli security source stated that the first stage of the plan would focus solely on freeing hostages. Under Trump's plan, Israel is prepared to withdraw to within a boundary known as the Yellow Line, creating a strategic buffer zone. Further withdrawals would depend on Hamas fulfilling specific conditions. The Israeli delegation includes representatives from the Mossad and Shin Bet intelligence agencies, as well as a foreign policy advisor and hostage coordinator Gal Hirsch. The lead negotiator is Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. Outcomes are expected toward the end of the week, depending on the progress of the talks. The Hamas delegation, led by Khalil al-Hayya, continues to take part despite personal losses. His son was killed in Doha a month ago, though al-Hayya himself survived an Israeli strike. The U.S. side is represented by Special Envoy Stephen Foichka and Jared Kushner, Trump's Jewish son-in-law. According to a Hamas source, the most contentious issue remains the disarmament demanded by Israel and Trump's plan. Hamas insists it will only agree to hand over its weapons once the Israeli occupation ends and a Palestinian state is established.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that at a press conference, the United States has opened the possibility for Kyiv to purchase Patriot air defense systems and missiles. He said the Americans have opened the opportunity not only to buy the missiles, but also the systems themselves. Now the issue is only about money. You see, there are both advantages and disadvantages. According to Zelensky, Ukraine's air defense largely depends on missiles purchased from the U.S. He added that among Kyiv's allies, there are very responsible countries that understand this and are ready to finance Ukraine's top defense priorities. Zelensky mentioned Germany, the Netherlands, Canada, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Baltic states, and others. He also said that Kyiv has resumed negotiations with its partners specializing in arms procurement, explaining, "We don't see the necessary technology in some other countries, unfortunately. Therefore, the current situation depends on these states." He did not specify which countries he meant. Earlier in the summer, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that the U.S. was ready to supply 17 Patriot systems to Ukraine, noting that European nations would pay for them. He promised to deliver several systems quickly. The Russian Foreign Ministry criticized the move, saying that Russia is against the delivery of weapons to Kyiv. By continuing military support for Ukraine, European countries are harming themselves.